welcome in. It is Big Ten today. It is great to have you with us. Dave Repson, Anthony Herron here, not just this Wednesday, but every Wednesday throughout the college football.
Continuity, that's important.
We're all about continuity.
We're around here, no doubt about it, man. Looking forward to another season next to you.
Yeah, absolutely. This should be a ton of fun. We got a lot to get to. But before we look forward, let's look back.
All right, I'm down for that.
Let's reminisce a little bit on the Big Ten award winners from last year who are back this year. They include Coach of the Year Mel Tucker, C.J. Stroud, who won a number of awards, including the Offensive Player of the Year. Riley Moss of Iowa was the returning DB of the year. And in an unusual twist, the return specialist of the year is back in the conference, but at a new school, Purdue's Charlie Jones transferring from Iowa to Purdue. All right, Anthony Herron, let's dive into this just a little bit. I want to get a few predictions from you. So we look back at what last year was. I want to know what you think is going to happen this year. Let us start with your Coach of the Year. When all is said and done in December, the Big Ten Coach of the Year will be?
I believe it'll be P.J. Fleck in Minnesota. For the way that the Gophers were a little bit up and down, a little bit inconsistent last season, P.J. Fleck in a 9-win year, which is no small thing, no small task for Minnesota football to have 9 wins in a season. It's only something they've done a few times in their history. But off of that, P.J. Fleck went into the offseason and said, you know what? There were games. Like, how do they lose to Bowling Green after being dominant the week before at Colorado? How do you end up losing to Illinois after being dominant the week before against Northwestern? P.J. Fleck came into the offseason and said, it's my task to make sure there's not those up and down performances with my team this coming fall. And there's so much talent that returns this year. So by my estimation, I think Minnesota is the most complete team from a potential perspective in the Big Ten West Division. I think in the end of it, if they have the type of season they have the potential for, then P.J. Fleck would be the Big Ten Coach of the Year.
I'll tell you, they were awfully impressive when we saw them in camp. And you talk about the rarities of the 9-win seasons. I mean, think about this. He's had 2 9-win seasons in the last 3 years. They had 2 since 1905 previous to that. So it really gives you a sense of the accomplishments of P.J. Fleck here. And
Henry Williams, I think, at the turn of the century. He's had as many 9-win seasons as anyone, but it's been a while since they've done that.
And I like the schedule, too, right? Yeah. The crossover schedule is favorable for them. I mean, at least in that they don't have to play Ohio State and don't have to play Michigan. That certainly works in their favor. They do play Penn State and Michigan State. So I'm with you. I think Minnesota's poised to have a really big year. Offensive Player of the Year in the Big Ten will be?
I believe it really will suit the Ohio State University Buckeyes if it's not C.J. Stroud. I think if the Offensive Player of the Year in this conference is TreVeyon Henderson, that's what will really be best for Buckeye football. And obviously, the way they throw the football, the talents of C.J. Stroud, we saw that on display throughout the Rose Bowl. So his passing acumen, the receivers they have, the passing numbers will be there, no doubt. But for the Buckeyes to be at their best, and I feel like Ryan Day has recognized that with the way he's kind of his temperament throughout the offseason, what they put the players through, just making sure there's a physicality that's built in there. If TreVeyon Henderson is able to run the football at a really high level for the Buckeyes, that's to me what will spell the best overall potential for the Buckeyes, to lead with physicality, to lead with dominance. It won't only aid that offense, it'll aid the defense as well.
That's interesting. I don't think he's going to get the ball enough. I mean, I think because they're so dynamic in the pass game, right, that you're kind of – Ryan Day is a pass-first coach.
He is.
And then you're making a conscious decision, as you say, to go away from something – that is a strength of your team. And then you also have Brian Williams, who's pretty good. And you got to give him some carries.
Yes, this is partly wishful thinking.
Yeah, I hear the way you're framing it, and I love the way you're framing it.
And I talked to you about it several times during the season last year, after they got pushed around by Oregon, after they got pushed around by Michigan especially. They got pushed around by Utah. Ohio State will be at their best if they lead with the ground attack. They're going to run plenty of plays. And C.J. Stroud will even have the ability. And he feels to me like a guy who is recognizing the scope of what he can accomplish, especially coming off that Rose Bowl performance. But I don't think he's going to get too big for his britches. Even some pre-snap adjustments, the ability for him to audibilize, the light box counts that Ohio State's going to get. C.J. Stroud can adjust play calls and hand it off, man. I mean, for Ryan Day to look at the film that was there last year, he's a smart football man. Yes, he was so pass first, not just this season, but for a couple of years now. I believe he knows, and bringing in Jim Knowles, but recognizes how this can affect the balance that's available to him on offense, but then also the scope of what it can do for his defense to take the field more rested and playing running downhill at their opponents.
If Travion Henderson is the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, they're going to be unstoppable on offense. Kind of to your, and I think that's your point.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah, that's the point you're making, and I hear you. It'd be fascinating to see were that to happen.
Ryan Day kept talking about the way they got pushed around. They didn't run it. They couldn't stop it.
They couldn't run it in the games that they were facing equal opposition.
Exactly.
Right? Where the level of the opponent, and the Michigan game, I think, is the biggest one that jumps to mind.
Yep. Can you run it when you have to? Can you stop the run when you have to? They've got to get better there.
How about a Defensive Player of the Year?
So this one was really difficult for me because I truly believe that Jack Campbell is probably the best defensive player in the Big Ten, but he's also surrounded by just a plethora of other talent on that Iowa defense that we know going into the year is going to be special. Now, Nick Herbig, on the other end, he's a playmaker for the Badgers in that Jim Leonard defense, but we're not completely sure who else is really going to be in that playmaking mix. So to me, going into the year, Nick Herbig is the guy that I think will be the Defensive Player of the Year in the Big Ten because his sack numbers are going to be eye-popping, and he's not going to have as many teammates who are going to be there taking plays away from him. So when he's rushing the quarterback, he may be the first one into the backfield because there's going to be youth and inexperience over there attacking the opposing line of scrimmage as well. And I just think Nick Herbig is that next line of great linebacker that we've seen for so long now at Wisconsin. And the plays that he'll have the potential to make will be there where he's going to be the one leading the pack for the Badgers really consistently.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, 9 sacks last year on a defense that was loaded with talent. To your point, I still think they're really talented from what we saw, and they obviously have a brilliant tactician in Jim Leonard leading the crew. Nick Herbig said to me, I mentioned this on the show yesterday, we were walking out, and I happened to be next to him walking down the tunnel after practice, and he said, we're going to have a better defense than a year ago. Right?
Really?
Yeah, I told Paul Chris that. He kind of laughed. He's like, oh, I'm glad he thinks that.
Quite a prediction there.
Number one in the nation in total defense. I could see it, to your point, though, I could see it being Jack Campbell. I could see it being Riley Moss. It's kind of how things play out. But those are two elite defenses.
They really are, amongst a number of them in the Big Ten. I mean, you know, who knows? Mariano Sori-Marin could be in that mix. There's a number of guys around the conference who have that potential.
Let's go from the individuals to the teams. Okay. Who do you think maybe you've shown your hand a little bit here with your Coach of the Year, but do you believe it's Minnesota that ultimately wins the West?
I believe so. I think just going in, the West is obviously unpredictable on the whole, but when you're wondering who's the most experienced quarterback in the conference, well, that's Tanner Morgan, and he's amongst the all-time leaders in program history in most of the significant passing categories. So that matters. The experience of that position. When you think about the defense that Joe Rossi has put together, the balance that they can deploy on offense will continue to enhance a Gophers defense that's got talents like Trill Carter up front, you know, like Coney Durr on the back end. They've got guys who've played at a high end on the back end, at linebacker. I mentioned Mariano Sori-Marin. So all three levels have dudes who can play. And then offensively, they've got a very deep receiver core that wasn't able to be featured last year, partly because of injury, partly because Tanner Morgan struggled at times. And I just think we're going to see the best version of Tanner Morgan. That offense, top to bottom, has playmakers, the depth at running back with Mo Ibrahim, the former running back of the year, returning, and a defense that is, you know, that's comparable amongst the best in the Big Ten, the best in the country. I just don't see another team that's as complete as the Gophers.
And again, I think anytime you try to figure out who might win the West, you look at schedule. And their schedule and Purdue's schedule, both of those are far more favorable than Iowa's and Wisconsin's, just in terms of the crossover games.
More unknowns for the Boilermakers with me, which is why I give the Gophers the edge there.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, Minnesota was an incredibly complete team, and you made the point earlier when we were at camp. It was pretty clear. Mo Ibrahim looked great, by the way. I mean, looked to be fully 100%. And then you have the Kirk Shiraka element of it, where how good that offense was, with particularly Tanner Morgan with Kirk Shiraka as the offensive coordinator. So even though you have a change there, you have incredible familiarity, and you have kind of this notion of getting the band back together. What about on the other side? I mean, Ohio State was the pick in the preseason. Again, it's an unofficial poll, but was the pick of every single writer who voted, not just to win the East, but to win the Big Ten. I mean, unanimous pick. Do you share this feeling that it's the Buckeyes in the East and as the Big Ten champs? I
would like to officially concur with the unofficial poll from Cleveland.com. There's legit competition in the East. We know how deep the Big Ten East is. I think Michigan has all the potential in the world to challenge because they're the defending Big Ten champs, and there's so many playmakers that return there. I view it's almost like Michigan and Ohio State are sort of the antithesis of each other, where the Buckeyes, if they lead with physicality more, this is a national championship caliber team. Frankly, if Michigan will trust their finesse a bit more, I think they are a national championship caliber team. We know what they tend to do on the line of scrimmage. I told you after that Rutgers game that they narrowly won last year. They got to start trusting Cade McNamara a little bit more. They began to do that steadily throughout the season. If they'll do that, man, they got so many playmakers on the outside and in the backfield. There's just a smorgasbord of talent there. But when it comes down to it, Ohio State is the known commodity. And I believe that Ryan Day seemed a little bit more gruff, a little bit more surly in Indianapolis at Big Ten Media Days because he doesn't like the way the season ended. There's a bad taste in his mouth. I believe that'll fuel the Buckeyes going into this season, just like it did a couple of years ago after that college football playoff loss to Clemson fueled them the entire following year.
Let me just say this. You have no idea how the season's going to play out, right? We go to camp, we parachute in, and Jerry and Howard Joshua and I talk about this all the time. You parachute in for one day, and then you draw these broad, sweeping conclusions from what you see. So I would take this with a grain of salt, but there's a pretty significant gap between Ohio State, Michigan, and everyone else. And to the point where—
From a talent perspective?
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me at all if they go into that matchup undefeated, both of them, and if both of those teams end up in the college football playoff. Wouldn't shock me.
One new coordinator in Columbus on defense, which that certainly matters. New coordinators on each side of the ball from Michigan. So that's going to be a lot for Jim Harbaugh to manage to figure out how do they get themselves to the point where they truly challenge the Buckeyes. You were talking schedule with Minnesota, schedule with Michigan early in the season gives them a way to sort of ascend into the most difficult meat of their conference slate.
I love the way Michigan's schedule lays out.
I think Jim Harbaugh does as well.
They're exactly the reason you say it's easy.
James Franklin, not so crazy about Penn State's early season.
No, going to Purdue the first game?
Right, yeah.
You don't think he likes that? Okay, so to summarize, because we're going to bring this back at the end of the year. Ohio State wins the league, topping Minnesota and Coach of the Year P.J. Fleck in the title game. The Buckeyes led in the triumph by the presence of Offensive Player of the Year Travion Henderson, while the Defensive Player of the Year Nick Herbig watches from home, I suppose. There is some sad news to report in the Big Ten today. Former Purdue quarterback Len Dawson has passed away at the age of 87. Dawson led the nation in passing efficiency as a sophomore at Purdue, also played defense and special teams for the Boilermakers. He was, of course, a Hall of Fame quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, led them to a win in Super Bowl IV, worked in the media for about half a century, most of it in the KC area. He was absolutely a beloved figure there. Len Dawson was 87 years old. Back on Big Ten today, last season a memorable one in the Big Ten and surprising as well. Michigan was coming off a 2-4 season in 2020, turned things around, made the college football playoff, ending a school record conference title drought in the process. Their only Big Ten loss came against Michigan State, which was picked last in its division. Former walk-on Aiden O'Connell became a star after being in a QB battle in camp, and Brett Bielema debuted at Illinois with a couple wins over ranked teams. So, Anthony, excited to get a sense of who you believe might surprise this year, although I suppose it won't surprise you because you are, in fact, predicting it.
Right.
Let's start with your first surprise, which comes out of Iowa City.
It does, and I referenced it in the previous segment that the talent that surrounds Jack Campbell at linebacker, just all over that Iowa defense, is part of the reason I don't necessarily think he's likely to win Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. Justin Jacobs, to me, is a future star. Probably a current star that just not as many folks know about, but another linebacker for the Hawkeyes who has all the physical potential in the world. It's the deepest linebacker core in the country. All the guys they put on the field have playmaking ability. And in the end, Justin Jacobs is the one that I think combines an ability to be a defensive back at times, to play the line of scrimmage, to rush the quarterback. Phil Parker has him doing so many things up front. They're going to have some big games. I'm going to get to call the one in week 2, the Cy-Hawk game that I'm really looking forward to. It's going to be a lot of fun. And he's such a playmaker for them that more folks are going to recognize his role and his importance to the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, that is a great thrill for us to have the Cy-Hawk game this year. But to your point, I mean, you got 3 linebackers that are all on the Butkus Award watch list. That's a pretty good group. Yeah, you have Seth Benson as well in there. Okay, how about a player who transferred within the conference?
Right.
This is a surprise for you as well at number 4.
Because we've seen a lot of Daniel Barker throughout his career with the Illini, and there just hasn't been necessarily a passing attack that goes along with what I think are special traits he has for the position. But now he's going to be in East Lansing, and he's going to have one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the country in Peyton Thorne. He's going to have a play caller in Jay Johnson that I think is really one of Mel Tucker's separating factors, why he brought Jay Johnson to Colorado with him, why he brought him to East Lansing with him. They work so well together at finding controlled aggression, the shot play opportunities. And we saw last season with Hayward, it wasn't just about, Connor Hayward being some blocker or additional pass protector. There were chunk plays they got from the tight end position that with what I believe is a more true tight end in Daniel Barker can even be featured within that Spartans offense more this season. I believe it's going to be a breakout campaign. Jaden Reed on the outside, Daniel Barker at tight end could mean big things for the Michigan State passing attack.
I'll tell you, Mel Tucker raved about him when we were at their walkthrough, which is what the practice we observed turned out to be. But he was saying he thinks Barker's going to be great. Again, he set the school record at Illinois for the most receiving touchdowns by a tight end. The school he left behind has a surprise in store, you believe, as well?
I believe so, because the Illini offense last year, obviously, Chase Brown was so good running the football. So you had that to lead with, and they've got Josh McCray coming back as well. So you have, this sort of two-headed monster at running back, but the offensive system will be different. A lot of us are wondering how different will it be. I had Brett Bielema on Big Ten Radio yesterday kind of trying to poke and prod into what that could be for the Illini offense. He wasn't giving up too much. We're going to find out.
He didn't give up too much when we were there either.
But we'll find out this weekend, right? And I think Barry Lunney being his offensive coordinator, they've worked together before at Arkansas, and I called the game where UTSA upset the Illini last year. Barry Lunney and that offense was a huge reason why, because of the balance that they deploy. Sincere McCormick was their running back. He had huge numbers. Their passing attack had huge numbers. They threw tempo at you. I do believe that for what he can bring to the table for the Illini offense in figuring out specifically how to deploy some of the playmakers like Isaiah Williams and getting him the football, like what remains at tight end from a deep linebacker or a tight end core with Luke Ford. I think overall, having DeVito at quarterback with a big arm, some shot plays, but then tempo and deployment of assets is something Barry Lunney's always been great at.
Given his background, as you said, at UTSA, I'd be astonished if they're not a more up-tempo offense this year. And obviously, Illinois needs a shot in the arm offensively. They're 115th in the nation in scoring a year ago. Michigan, of course, was a huge surprise a season ago, and you think there's at least one player who could surprise there this year?
I mean, to be honest, man, there's several guys. If Michigan takes the offensive approach that I felt like maybe they should have taken in the college football playoff against what I felt like was a Georgia secondary they could have overmatched, the talent on this and the experience going into this season for Michigan is not on the defensive side. It's on the Wolverines' offense. And regardless of which quarterback is in there, if it's Cade McNamara, that's great. You trust his decision-making. If it's J.J. McCarthy, you know the electrifying athlete he is behind center when he's in the game. But the deployment of assets that I referenced a moment ago, Andrell Anthony is electrifying, but Donovan Edwards, as much as Blake Corum should be trusted with the rock as frequently as they want to give it to him, the dude who's different in the backfield between his stature, his speed, his ability to make defenders miss. He started to get used kind of as a wide receiver last year almost to Donovan Edwards, but there's a reason he was one of the top recruits in the country when he came out of high school. When the football is in his hands, it just looks like magical things can happen. I believe that in the Michigan offense that will start to disperse the football around more freely than they did last year, with new play callers in on offense, but Donovan Edwards is a guy that the nation's going to be introduced to.
To your point, 20 catches a season ago. He threw a touchdown pass in the Big Ten championship game.
You have to pay attention to
There's a reason he was a top 50 talent coming out of high school. Finally, a team that might surprise.
The Maryland Terrapins are such that Mike Locksley doesn't love how bullish I'm being publicly about them, the ability for the Terps to maybe sneak up on some folks here. But when it comes down to it, I believe Talia Tagovailoa is I would view him as the second best quarterback in the Big Ten going into the season here. Aside from that game, that really quarter against Iowa, he was really exceptional in most other outings that he had there. And for the way that Mike Locksley, Dan Enos have been raving about the experience they have returning on the offensive line, offensively, that was kind of the big bugaboo because they were still able to move the rock, put points on the board pretty consistently, even with all the injuries they had at receiver. And oh, by the way, Dante Demas is back. Jayshon Jones is back. Rakim Jarrett returns again as their leading receiver who actually stayed healthy throughout the season last year. They're young at running back, but when you've got all 5 starters returning on the offensive line, like remember week 2 when I called the Michigan State game and I came in here and I told you, man, I think the Spartans are really good this year. I'm excited to see Maryland week 1. I'm calling their game Buffalo at Maryland. I'm really looking forward to seeing, is Maryland going to be that squad that, like we saw 2019 from Minnesota, 2020 from Indiana, last season from Michigan State? is Maryland this season's team that leaps into a double-digit win category? I think this year can be the Terps.
You'll like that offensive line a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, they absolutely.
I'm just salivating watching how they operate.
Yeah, their schedule's challenging. They play Purdue and Wisconsin in crossovers as well, and anytime you're in the East, your schedule's challenging. But they're talented, no question about it. The question will be the defense and whether or not the defense is up to the challenge. Nebraska is #1, gets us to our big interview. The 4-time national championship coach of the Huskers, John Cook, kind enough to join us from our studio in Lincoln. And, Coach, we saw you there atop the poll. Obviously, there are massive external expectations for this team. I'm sure there are big internal ones as well. But when you are atop the poll, this is nothing new for you. It's happened to you several times, most recently 6 years ago. How do you handle that with your team? Is it something you acknowledge, or do you just kind of say, well, they all know we're #1, I'm not going to talk about it?
The way we handled it was when the rankings came out, which, of course, every coach hates the rankings when they come out, whether it's good or bad. If you get ranked low, that sends a message too. But I just asked them a question. I said, what program's been ranked #1 more than any other college program? And it's been Nebraska. So it's just part of the deal. We're used to getting everybody's best shot, and it's just kind of the expectation here that you got a target on your back, and I also think it's a sign of respect for our program and our team, but we're not the #1 team in the country if you come to practice right now. We got a lot of work to do and a long way to go, and we got a lot of new players we're trying to incorporate in. So I was actually kind of surprised that it ended up that way.
What are the biggest things you are working on right now as you head towards the season opener this weekend?
Well, we have 5 new players, so 14 players. I mean, over a third of our teams, this is their first time they've practiced with Nebraska Volleyball. So trying to get them incorporated. We're trying to figure out a starting lineup. We've been kind of messing around with different options because I really feel like we got 14 players that can play and help us. So letting them compete and again, getting our fundamentals in, our foundation in of what we got to do to be good for by the time we get to the Big Ten season.
It is staggering to look at that poll, Coach, and just think of how good this league is and how many great programs you're going to play when you get into conference play. What is the biggest challenge in terms of playing in what is clearly the deepest conference in the country?
Well, it's a really big challenge because every week you're playing somebody good and probably somebody ranked. So, and the teams that aren't ranked are still really good. So it's you've got to be able to perform every night and have the mindset to do that while you're in school, while you're in traveling. And with the new Big Ten schedule this year, there's a couple weekends where you're home on a Friday and you're traveling on a Sunday or vice versa. So there's going to be some unique challenges in the schedule and travel, and then trying to perform at your best. And then you're going to have a short memory. If you win a big match, great. You better get ready because there's somebody else waiting for you a couple days later. And if you lose a match, you got to have a short memory and know you have another opportunity to play another great team. So it's a tough deal, but this is why we do so well in the NCAA tournament. Why we have teams, 2 Big Ten teams played for the national championship last year, and it really prepares you for that. And it really, I think, crystallizes a true champion. We're the only sport that doesn't have a conference tournament in the Big Ten. So we got to prove it over 10 weeks, 20 matches. You're going to play everybody, at least once, and a lot of good teams, really good teams, twice. So I think it really identifies a true champion as well. We might be, I'd have to double check, but I don't know how many sports in the Big Ten go all 10 weeks. To determine a conference champion.
It's interesting, too. I was looking down the top 25, and no great surprise, UCLA is in it. USC is in it as well. So the league isn't going to get any easier here, Coach. How does that change the dynamic? How does the expansion of the conference westward change things for you in terms of the competition and also perhaps in recruiting? I know you've gone west quite a bit to get good players.
Yeah, I think it'll help recruiting for everybody, including USC and UCLA. So, but it just makes us the premier conference. I mean, what I'm seeing is everybody wants to play in the Big Ten now. All the top recruits want to play in the Big Ten because it is the premier conference. We're drawing huge crowds. It's a big deal. We're #1 on Big Ten Network for women's sports. So this is just going to take it up to another notch. Now, what I'd like to see is USC and UCLA, when they come in, up their game as far as attendance and match, how they promote matches and so on, because they've got to keep up with the Big Ten, or it could hurt them. If all these Big Ten schools are building new facilities and selling out arenas, and they're only getting 300 people in the men's volleyball team coming in. So I think, but again, it makes it coast to coast. It's going to be a super conference for volleyball. And I think it's going to be really exciting to coach in that. It's going to be a great challenge. It's already tough, and now that just ups the ante, and then you've got the travel that is going to come into that as well.
It's interesting. Expansion is obviously a huge topic in college athletics right now. NIL is a huge topic, and it's fascinating to me to see the opportunities that the young women on your team in particular have had, from being spokespeople for products to running volleyball camps. How has the dynamic of NIL changed your world as a coach?
That's a really good question. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm old school. I'm an older coach. I've been doing this a while. And I remember the days when my first office was in a closet, and now these guys are getting, deals. And I remember, I lost Craig Skinner, who coached with me at Wisconsin when I was there. It was called restricted earnings coach. They could only make $12,000, and coaches were getting out because they just couldn't afford to coach on that salary. And here we are today with players making more than that and all these deals and opportunities. But what it does is, I think Nicklin Hames summed it up really well. She says, I feel more connected with our fan base and the community now than I ever have through all this. Now, the challenge is managing it. They still have to be students, and they still got to perform at a high level. And the other thing that I tell them is, well, with the more rewards there are, the greater the expectations are going to be. And they have to realize that's going to be part of life and part of this deal, and people are going to expect more. So, you got to be able to handle that.
How do you deal with players differently than perhaps you did when you started at Wisconsin in 1992?
Well, I started off as a football coach, so I coached them like football coaches, and I was at Wisconsin, it was Barry Alvarez and John Palermo. Those guys were there, Kevin Cosgrove. I mean, those were some great football coaches, and I would go watch them and study them. Of course, I also studied Coach Osborne as well. Before that, I was an assistant at Nebraska, so I got to be around, and I love football, and I started off coaching football in high school before I ever coached volleyball, and so that's how I started. Well, times have changed. That doesn't work anymore, and I think the biggest change I've seen is I try to build relationships with these players and understand their world and try to connect with their world. So that means I got to do silly things like I had to do at Media Day. I got to understand their music, their life, their culture, their challenges. So I've spent a lot more time investing in that, as opposed to just being, here it is, we're here for practice, we're going to, they're going to get this, and I really don't care about any of that other stuff. And so I've had to evolve, but that's also keeps you young, and it keeps it exciting, and I think it helps me grow as a coach to get better.
And their world is so different too, right? I mean, it was interesting noting the connection to the fan base. I mean, they're connected to the fan base constantly, right? Because they have that phone where people can talk to them at any point. I mean, it was amazing to me to see, you guys sold out a scrimmage last weekend. You had a fan day where you got people lined up for an hour and a half to get autographs from the players. So there is that amazing interaction, and you're at a place where volleyball matters. What does it mean to you to be at a place where it matters so deeply to the fan base?
Well, I always say Nebraska is the epicenter of volleyball in this country. Omaha is going to be sold out. We've sold out every match since 2001, and that was a challenge that we challenged our fans to like, hey, football's got this sellout streak, so let's get one for volleyball. So that's been going longer than the age of our players. I mean, they weren't even born then. So Nebraska has done it's a state treasure here, and people are, and they love this program. They love the players. They love because we have interacted and we are connected. But I always say, if you're going to work this hard, why not be somewhere where people care? And it is important. And yeah, do you feel pressure with that? Sure. But I also think that pressure and expectations helps bring out the best in us, because we don't want to let our fans down.
How about for you personally? I mean, I know you went through a period where you spoke very openly about that there was a ton of pressure and you weren't sure you were enjoying it to the degree that you did earlier, and actually spoke to Coach Osborne, interestingly enough, about kind of how he handled that scrutiny. How have you changed your outlook or the way that you go about your everyday job to deal with the pressure and the scrutiny?
Yeah, you've done your homework, and I did hit a point where, like, okay, what's left? What's next? How can we make it any better? And and I think every coach and probably every person who works hard and is in a high-pressure job goes through that at some point. That's what I found. I discovered a lot of when I started asking questions, a lot of other people were feeling the same way I was, or had gone through something like that. And Coach Osborne was one of them. Who really helped me, and you have to, again, I use the word evolve. You have to evolve, and so I had to change some things, how I took care of myself, my routines, had to become more self-aware of how my body felt and how to manage that. And again, I think another big thing is I try to do other things to take me away from volleyball. So I learned I got my pilot's license. I now have a horse. That is a big deal here. He's been our volunteer coach here, Bud. But it's things that take you away and get your mind off of coaching volleyball and those pressures and expectations. So, it comes back to balance. Do you have a balance in your life? And, with the pressure, you think you got to work harder. And I've learned how to manage that, work smarter, and try to have breaks away from that and get around people that don't know volleyball, or they're not always talking about volleyball. And for right now, that's the horse world for me. And a few years ago, it was flying planes. I mean, when you're flying a plane, I'm not thinking about what rotation we need to be in or what recruit we need to get. You're flying the plane. So those are some things I've learned, and I've been very fortunate to have a platform to share some of that and try to help other people work through some of those things.
I want to ask you, you mentioned that you started off as a football coach, which I just think is fascinating, right? That this was not, I mean, this is a sport you knew, but you certainly didn't set out to be the person that you are. It wasn't like you were 12 years old and you were consumed by volleyball and you said, I'm going to be the greatest volleyball coach of all time. And yet there's a great argument that could be made that you are, right? I mean, you've won 4 national championships, you've been to 10 straight Elite Eights, you've won nearly 800 games. I mean, the numbers are just staggering. Do you ever sit back, John, and just say, how in the world did all this happen?
Well, that's happened a few times. I still wish I go out to football practice and I'm like, God, I'd love to be coaching football. And and I see the guys in the training table and I talk to them all the time. And a lot of our players date football players, so they come to our games, and I mean, I just love interacting with those football guys, and miss it. And of course, when they're playing, I mean, I'm like glued to the TV and nervous and all that stuff. But the only reason I started coaching volleyball is to get my first full-time teaching job. They said you have to coach girls volleyball and girls basketball because girls sports were just starting in California. It was in San Diego back in the 80s, and I was coaching football but couldn't get a full-time teaching job, so you were a substitute teacher and coached football, which was great, but at some point you got to have a full-time job, and they threw me in there, and now here I am at Nebraska coaching volleyball, so from San Diego. But there was several times I was trying to get out of coaching high school back into football, and it just never worked out.
Well, I'd say in the aggregate, it has worked out for sure for you. Just incredible success. You had mentioned being in Omaha, that the Final Four is there this year. Do you think at all about the end? when you start? Do you think at all? I mean, you've won, Nebraska's won some national championships in Omaha. How do you, when you're starting this long process, this grind, how do you keep your mind off of where it could end for you and focus on today's practice?
We start talking about that at the beginning of the year and in the summer. Hey, it's Destination Omaha, and we start with the end in mind. Here's where we want to get to. How are we going to get there? And we build back from there, and that's our plan. So we embrace it. We talk about it. I try to keep it fun and saying, hey, Omaha is going to be throwing a big party December 17th through the 20th. So we just want to make sure we get our invite to go and be at that party.
Coach, you mentioned your horse, Bud. I can't let you go without asking you about him. You referred to him as a volunteer assistant, right? So I'm fascinated by how a horse can volunteer. I mean, is he like Mr. Ed? Did he whisper in your ear that he wanted to volunteer? Or did you kind of volunteer him?
Well, this spring I got Bud, and anyway, Nebraska is an agricultural state,
yeah.
And all of a sudden I started getting invited to all these brandings, and you got video on here of me. I got invited to go train with the UNL rodeo team, which I didn't even know we had a rodeo team. And there's Reba, his girlfriend. They're giving little love to each other there. And I'm practicing roping. They started teaching me how to rope. So anyway, the reason we made Bud our volunteer was I wanted to use Bud as a platform to share advice and share different things. And where it took off was people loved it, and then recruits really got into it. So it was just a way of kind of communicating social media-wise without, Coach Cook sending this tweet. And I usually mess them up anyway, and I don't do the right hashtags and all that. So this is a way of us kind of social media getting more attention, and he ended up on our poster, and so it's just worked out, and people love it. And in our fan day, I signed for 2.5 hours, and at least half the people asked me about Bud, and can we bring him to the next fan day and have him there and take pictures with him, and so it's been fun. And again, you asked me about evolving. These are the things that connect with this generation and keep it exciting, and it's not just volleyball all the time. And we try to have fun with that, and Bud was one way that allowed us to do that. And people love horses, and our players love horses. So it's it's just something that's kind of evolved, and it's been a lot of fun.
Coach, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us. Best of luck this year as the Huskers embark on a national championship quest.
Thank you very much, and honored to be on with you and Big Ten. And again, as we were talking earlier, that the Big Ten Media Days was epic, and it just took our conference and Big Ten volleyball to another level, and nationally. I've heard so many people make comments about that. So thanks for your support and everything you guys are doing.
Well, the network was honored to be a part of it. John Cook, thank you very much. Northwestern and Nebraska now both in Ireland in advance of Saturday's season opening showdown. Huskers arrived Tuesday. They tweeted out a bunch of shots of the team, including the warm welcome they got from some Huskers fans who are already in the country. Did a little bit of sightseeing, walking around Dublin. They saw the stadium. They have emphasized, this is a business trip, looking to start the season on a positive note. And of course, both teams in that mindset. Pat Fitzgerald tweeting out this shot from Aviva Stadium in Dublin this morning. The Wildcats landed in Dublin today. They had a disappointing campaign last year, as did Nebraska. Both went 3-9. You can catch that matchup Saturday on Fox. Want to dive quickly into the quarterback situations for both teams. Pretty interesting. Northwestern has not revealed a starter. It was Ryan Helinski and Brendan Sullivan battling it out in camp. What are you expecting from that spot?
I think overall, because the approaches have been different, it's not the first time we've seen Fitz kind of keep that close to the vest when there's been a quarterback battle that's been going on within his program. So it may be opening kickoff, it may be whoever runs out there with the Wildcats offense the first time we figure it out. But Ryan Helinski is the one who's been more experienced and who they've had the opportunity to at least evaluate. And there's a lot of talk coming out of Evanston that he physically looks different. There's an enhanced level of confidence is there as well. He's obviously been with Mike Bajakian for several seasons here. He's played the game a lot. He's had more starts than Aiden O'Connell has. So where, we talk about Aiden O'Connell as this proven commodity and experience, Ryan Helinski has played the game a lot. at Northwestern and throughout his career at multiple stops here. So he will get that opportunity, I believe, and then from there, we'll just see where the offense goes. As long as they can effectively hand it off to Evan Hull, then they're going to be in pretty good shape.
And Cam Porter,
And
yeah,
Cam
that's
Porter,
going to be a
yeah.
really deep backfield, and you feel like they'll probably lean on that running game early on. But yeah, to your point, I mean, Helinski was a starter as a true freshman at South Carolina, I mean, in the SEC, so certainly has the history there. Nebraska, there was a little bit of a competition when we were at camp, but I think it was pretty clear it was going to be Casey Thompson's job, and now, in fact, Scott Frost has made that official. What are you expecting from the Texas transfer?
I believe overall the fact that Scott Frost has put so much, I believe, confidence into the notion that Casey Thompson has earned this opportunity, where he maybe didn't name him initially, but a lot of us just assumed because of the pedigree that Casey Thompson would end up winning the job. But being willing to name him, being willing to have the team rally around him as an individual talent behind center makes sense. Now, you know, Chubba Purdy, talented. We've seen Logan Smothers get some opportunities also. But Casey Thompson, just talking to him and listening to him address the media, an extremely intelligent and impressive guy at quarterback also. Just breaking down Northwestern's defense, listening to him do that as well. He certainly seems as ready as anyone could hope to be for this opportunity.
He definitely looked the part. I'd say Purdy looked the part as well. I mean, I think they've got a really nice quarterback situation. Again, look, Adrian Martinez did some great things there. He's their career total offense leader. But it does feel like they've turned the page. 4 new offensive coaches, new offensive coordinator in Mark Whipple, and again, a new quarterback in Casey Thompson.